archaeological research here in Jerusalem. He has spoken to us before, and this should be, we're working on an exciting topic. So stay tuned for next week. You'll receive notices in the mail, in the email. So we're now on live, and it's with great pleasure that I welcome back a speaker we had a few
Art, unmute
Art,
yourself.
you are muted. Art, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, so we're very pleased to have as our speakers today Steve Gray, who has been with us before, and newcomer Rabbi Haviva Ner David. Both are members of the conservative kibbutz of Hanaton in the Galilee. Steve has been working with Keshet Innovation Nation programs in concentrating on the development of the high-tech and business touring programs, tour guiding of business delegations and high-tech delegations. He was for 15 years with Intel and was part of Intel's capital team, where he guided investments in Israeli startups that were aligned with Intel's strategic goals. Before making Aliyah, Steve received a BS in Bachelor of Science in Management Science and a Master's in Accountancy. He became an Israeli CPA in 1980. He completed the Israeli tour guide course and has been guiding groups of business students, investors, and business people on tours of Israel, combining the stories of the first century and the miracles of the 21st century. We had a few miracles in the first century as well, I believe. So some of our members, by the way, Steve, are also graduates of the tour course, in particular David, who's here with us today. And at the same time, we have Rabbi Haviva. She was ordained in 2005 and has studied both ministry and spiritual counseling. Haviva is also trained in dream work and nature soul retrieval work. Wow, we have to have you back just on that, Haviva. She is a strong believer in creating one's own unique spiritual journey and counsels individuals and couples, including many rabbis and rabbinical students. Calling herself a post-denominational interspiritual rabbi, her specialty is in the mikveh, the ritual bath, and in spiritual counseling. She is the founding rabbi of Shemaya, a mikveh for mind, body, and soul on Kibbutz Hanaton. Haviva wrote her doctoral dissertation on the changing understandings of mikveh and nidah from the time of the Hebrew Bible until the present. So, without further ado, 20 minutes, it's your presentation, Haviva and Steve, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting us, Art, and giving us the opportunity to speak with you. I hope you can all hear me well, and I hope you can see the shared screen that I put up now. And Haviva and I are going to talk briefly about a couple of aspects of mikveh here at Hanaton. One, a story that starts a couple of thousand years ago, and another one that starts just in the last couple of decades. And it's all connected to mikveh, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for you to ask us questions, and we'll be more than happy to speak with you and hopefully answer the questions that might arise. The pictures that you see here is on the lower part is a picture of the Chanaton, Kibbutz Chanaton, the Yishuv, the settlement of Chanaton. We're located in the lower Galilee, not far from Nazareth, not far from Tzipori, and just a short walk or even a shorter drive from the intersection that's known as Tzomet HaMovil, where some road work was taking place earlier this summer. And that's when I started to get involved in what I'll call my mikveh experience. I'll have to tell you that up until I got involved here, I did not really have, I would say, a strong relationship with the mikveh. It wasn't something that was part of my own life. But I will say in the last couple of months, I've become immersed, if I can use that term, in the mikveh, or certainly a mikveh experience of my own that is continuing to evolve and unfold. Just to put this in some perspective on the map, you can see Kibbutz Chanaton here on the map. The big, large body of water, by the way, that's opposite Kibbutz Chanaton is Maagar Eshkol, part of the national water carrier, and Movil Haretzi. From that, the intersection of Movil, Tzomet HaMovil gets its name. And just about a kilometer or so down the road is where this excavation was taking place. The excavation took place because because of the road work. As many of you who live here in Israel know, there's oftentimes what we call a chafirot hatzalah, salvage excavation, in order to see what is under the ground in an area that, because of road work or some other construction, might become inaccessible to future generations. And in order to at least understand, if not preserve, what's underneath, there's some excavations done. And in fact, this is exactly what happened towards the end of May this year. You mentioned that David is a tour guide. Well, we tour guides don't have a lot of work at the moment, certainly those of us who are involved in incoming tourism. So I had some time on my hands, and a friend of mine at the kibbutz suggested she had heard of the excavation going on here at the Movil intersection. I said, well, I've got nothing better to do. So I volunteered. I didn't really check into the details. The work started at 5:30 a.m. and went to 1:30, 8 hours a day, starting at 5:30 a.m. Perhaps if I had been a little bit more attentive to the details, I might have thought twice about signing up. But I signed up for a week's worth of work, and I decided, worst case, I'll lose a few hours sleep, and best case, it could be a great experience. It was both took place, and I'm happy for the experience itself. Let me show you the area that we started to dig in. When I came to the site on that first day on Sunday morning, this is what the site looked like. It was just a plain site, nothing particularly unusual or exciting. And if any of you have ever participated in an archaeological dig, and those of you in Israel may have had that opportunity, you know it's a lot of hard work, and generally not a lot is to be found, especially in a case where they weren't sure that there was anything that they were going to find here. They had done some excavations in the couple of years previous and had found some elements of what looked at the time to be a agricultural farm, and so they were expecting to find some more agricultural related things, but equally as likely that they wouldn't find anything on the site. It turns out that underneath where the arrow is was hiding a mikveh from the Second Temple period. So when we got to the site on that first day, I started to dig, and most of the work is usually done on your knees, which isn't, for somebody our age is not necessarily the most comfortable position to be. But we were working away, and bit by bit, things started to come out of the ground. Now, again, even though I didn't have very high expectations of finding anything, even so, it's hard to dig in an area where there's been, centuries, if not millennia of human activity and not find something. And in fact, pottery shards of old vessels started to reveal themselves. And frankly, it's actually I'd say it was quite exciting, even just to take something out of the ground and realize that it had been there for maybe 14, 15, 1600 years without being disturbed, and you're the first one in that period of time to actually touch it again. It was that in and of itself was exciting. By the second day, we started to uncover part of a wall, and where the archaeologist is straddling the wall on the right-hand side of the wall, they found some plaster on the wall, which could mean a lot of things. Could be a cistern, could be some sort of a water-containing place. Might just be decorative plaster on the wall, but certainly something that required some more examination. And so during the rest of the week, we started to dig with a focus on this area as well as the other areas, and bit by bit, what was underneath started to reveal itself. And as you can see here on the picture on the far right, we started to see a structure that not only was there plaster on the wall, but we started to see steps and steps with plaster covering them as well. Bit by bit, as the steps went down deeper into the earth, it became clear that what we were looking at was an ancient Mikve Tahara, a ritual immersion pool. Those of you in Israel are probably familiar with the term, but this is clearly a part of the Jewish tradition of immersing yourself in the waters of the mikveh to attain a spiritual purity. And in today's world, and Haviva will elaborate further, it has become mostly for women, having to do with the halachic rules of nidah. And again, I'll defer to Haviva to explain to that, but much more than that as well. And so once the mikveh started to become clear, the whole concept of the site that we were digging in began to change. Because if there's one thing, or if there are two things, I'd say that indicate that there's a Jewish settlement, one would be a Beit Knesset, and the other would be a mikveh. And frankly, of the two, the mikveh is probably the more important of the two, because Beit Knesset, you can pray, you can study most anywhere, but a mikveh requires specific place, and the requirements are determined by the rabbis to be very specified as to how the mikveh is built and how it needs to be done. And so the mikveh is a very important component of any Jewish community. And at that point, the whole concept of what the site was about began to change, because instead of just being an agricultural farm, they said, all right, if there's a mikveh here, it means that the people who are working on this agricultural farm had to be concerned with a level of spiritual sanctity, which means that the whether it was the wine or the olive oil or other agricultural products, the people who are working there needed to be careful to maintain their sanctual purity, which may mean that the people who either owned or ran the agricultural farm were concerned with it, or perhaps the products themselves were going to be used for ritual purposes, perhaps in Jerusalem or perhaps locally at Sipori or Shfaram. There was also the Sanhedrin also was close by. We're near both those sites. And so now the site becomes something of great archaeological interest. And when we finally finished the archaeological work, you can see here that the mikveh is actually quite impressive. It has a number of steps going down to a pool large enough to contain the appropriate amount of water and deep enough so that people could immerse themselves fully in the waters of the mikveh. The nature of the plaster on the walls of the mikveh was of a type that led the archaeologists to date this particular mikveh in the Second Temple period, prior to the destruction of the temple, which could mean as early perhaps as the 1st century BC, but probably 1st century AD and maybe 2nd century. The 3rd century there was an earthquake in the middle of the 4th century, 363 AD, that probably destroyed most of the village here or the work here. And since that point in time, the place had not been touched. So all of this was quite exciting to everyone who was working on the site, but the excitement was followed quickly as we prepared the site for pictures and documentation. It became clear that, according to the plans, this site was about to be destroyed within a matter of weeks. The road that was going to be built right in this spot, and that the mikveh itself was in the area that was going to be leveled and covered with concrete. So as exciting as it was to have discovered it, there was a great deal of frustration and I'd say sorrow that this beautiful Second Temple mikveh was going to be lost. At which point, during an open house, I just want to see what's on the next slide. During an open house in the following week, Haviva and a friend of ours who was also a tour guide, Anat Harel, came to the site and said, "Oh my goodness, this is sad. Perhaps we can make a copy of the ancient mikveh and bring it over to Hanaton, or replicate something at Hanaton." And the archaeologists said, "Well, why make a replica? Why don't you just take it and move it to Hanaton?" Which sounded like in my mind at the time, to be an absolutely crazy idea. How do you take a hole in the ground and move it from one place to another? It turns out that immediately, with Anat and Rabbi Haviva's enthusiasm, I was swept up in this idea. Let's see if we can get the mikveh moved from its site here in the way of the road to our site in the kibbutz. We explored the idea with someone who I knew was involved in this kind of work, a fellow by the name of Yeshu Drey, and he said, "Sure, I can get this out and I can move it." And we asked for a quote, and he said it'll be about 300,000 shekel, which is either not a lot of money or a lot of money if you don't have any. And we said, all right, well, let's see what we can do. Maybe we can raise the money. And we started to look around. The next month or so, I'd say the next 2 months, we've been on a whirlwind mission to try and raise funds in order to save this mikveh and to move it to Hanaton, where we have an operating mikveh that Haviva will tell you about, which is worthy of a story in its own right. I'll be short and say that we have, in almost a miraculous manner, found funding to be able to salvage the mikveh and move it from its current site to Hanaton. We are still raising funds in order to get it into the ground here and preserve it and be able to take care of it once it arrives here. And the spot that we have chosen to move it to is not coincidental. We're going to move it close by to an existing mikveh that we have at Hanaton, which is worthy of expounding on in its own right. And in the interest of time, I'm going to skip this next slide, the next couple of slides, and turn the microphone over to Haviva, who will explain a little bit about the mikveh that we have at Hanaton and why we decided to try and move the mikveh to Hanaton. So Haviva, I'm turning the microphone over to you.
Before you switch, one of the things that jumped up in our imagination when we first discussed the mikveh was the possibility, if not probability, probably only possibility, that Jesus himself had availed himself of this mikveh.
Let me expound on that. Let me just take 2 words to expound on that, because there are two characters, if you will, 2 personages here in this area that, at least in theory, could have come by here and have immersed themselves in the mikveh. One, of course, Jesus, who was born close by, and as I look out my window over the top of my computer here, I can see see beyond Sipori and the ridge of Nazareth. Jesus's grandmother lived in Sipori. He was born in Nazareth, and one of the theories is that this farm that was here, that was being worked, was perhaps one of the more wealthy or pious people from Sipori at the time. And perhaps Jesus might have been wandering here in the area, come to visit some of the workers here. Maybe some of his friends here were working, and he might have dipped in this very mikveh itself. There's another possibility that is no less probable, and that is that the governor of the Galilee at one point, and Sipori was the capital, was none other than King Herod. And King Herod, before he took over in Jerusalem, was here in this area. And so when we're talking about rich families in the Sipori area who may have had a farm and were concerned about ritual purity, King Herod in his early days might have also been involved. Perhaps even, who knows, this might have been a farm that was associated with the family. So from a tour guide's perspective, the possibilities are mind-boggling. As you say, I can't talk about probability. We can only talk about possibility. But it's certainly, anytime here in the Galilee, we like to draw connections to people's historical roots, and this could certainly be one of them. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Thank you very much.
Haviva, over to you.
Okay, so I'll take the story off from where Steve mentioned me, and I'll just tell me how much time I have so I'll know how to pace myself. Like, when do you want me to stop and ask questions?
Maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, probably less. I can do less. Okay. So when I went over to see this mikveh, I was especially excited because on Kibbutz Hanaton is the only mikveh in Israel that is not run by the rabbinate, by the Orthodox rabbinate. And I run the mikveh, and it's what that means. The other mikvahot in Israel that are run by the rabbinate, they make the rules about who can immerse in them and when they can immerse in them. And our mikveh is designed and founded on the principle that it's like an ocean, which is also a mikveh, or a spring, which is also a mikveh, and that we have no right to tell anyone, who can immerse, who can't immerse, when they immerse. So that's our motto. And the key is out front, and people make an appointment and they can come and they can immerse. And it ranges from somebody coming and we never see them, to offering spiritual counseling before and helping them create a ceremony for their immersion. So that wide range. We also host the most of the conversions that take place in Israel that are not through the rabbinate take place at our mikveh too. Just yesterday I did one, and it frequently happens at our mikveh. So that means through the reform and the conservative movement. And just now I'll kind of put it all in context to explain where this fits in, and then, okay. So, and actually maybe just for a second, I'll just get back to that moment where I went to look at this mikveh. I actually didn't go to the open house because I'm trying not to go to gatherings during the pandemic. And someone, my husband came home and said, oh, you must go to see this. There's this mikveh there, this 2,000-year-old mikveh. So I went the next day alone. And just the thing that really struck me, because I've seen other mikvaot at archaeological sites, but what really touched me was that it's just a few minutes away from our mikveh, which is such a special mikveh. And it just felt to me so synchronistic that here it is that we run this mikveh here, and just a few, kilometer away. I'm not exactly sure what it is, Steve. I'm not great with distance, but something like that, a kilometer away. Is that right? They uncovered this other mikveh, and the thought that they were going to just destroy it was just heartbreaking to me, especially because I thought right away when I saw that there's this mikveh, I thought, oh, wonderful, I'll be able to tell people on their way to our mikveh that they can stop at this one and see an ancient mikveh before they come to immerse. And then, when I was told that actually they're going to destroy it, it was really heartbreaking. So I'll explain something else about, to put it in historical context, is that, so in the time of the biblical period in the sources, so mikveh was used, as Steve talked about, for purity purposes, and it was for men and for women. And then when the temples were destroyed, slowly the purity practices fell out of use, and mikveh became associated really with women going after bleeding from the uterus, because that is the one kind of ritual impurity that also has another ramification, not only that you couldn't go to worship in the temple if you had that impurity, but also you could not have sexual intercourse. So that practice of going to mikveh after bleeding from the uterus, just that continued to this day. And many people associated mikveh with that. But really, men were continuing to go to mikveh for spiritual reasons, like they could go whenever they want, and for spiritual reasons. And what happened in Israel and in general with the institution of mikveh is it became institutionalized. So even though, as I said, an ocean, a spring, those are all mikvehs, these built mikvahs, mikvaot, they became kind of monopolized by the Orthodox male establishment. And so like in Israel, so what happened is they started making rules. So only married women can go to the mikveh. And only, also the using mikveh for conversion, also around the time of the Talmud, when they were looking for a ritual for conversion, because there was no ritual for conversion before that period. They were looking for a ritual, and they said, mikveh, that makes sense because it's a transformative, transitional kind of ritual. So they adopted the ritual for that. So it was being used for that, for men and for women, and women going after bleeding from the uterus, and men kind of going whenever they had the spiritual urge to go to mikveh. And so there's a lot of baggage around mikveh. There was, and there still is, when people associate it just with women going for purity, around all the rules and regulations around women, and men just being able to go whenever they want. So this mikveh, the mikveh that we run in Hanaton, is part of a movement that began about 15 years ago in the world, which is, oh, did you lose me for a minute? Can you hear me?
No,
Yes, you're fine.
no, you're fine. Yeah.
Okay. A movement that started in the world of what I call the reclaiming and reframing mikveh movement, which is the idea that to once again take the idea of mikveh to be not just for women only to go, only married women going only at night, and only when people say they can go, and really opening up this idea of mikveh just to be a spiritual practice for anyone who wants to experience the spiritual practice. And so there are mikvahs like this now all over the world. And it's quite revolutionary because mikveh was always kind of associated with the Orthodox. And as I said, just women going after menstruating and conversion. But now there's been this explosion, and it's really amazing, of this idea of kind of reclaiming mikveh as a spiritual practice. So that's what we have at Hanaton. It's open for people to come for whatever reason they want to come. So it's also conversions. It's also after bleeding from the uterus, but it's also for all kinds of transition rituals. So just to give you anything you can think of, really, but it could be for a 70th birthday, after a divorce, for after finishing chemotherapy treatments, for so many, really anything that you can think of, people have come to do ceremonies at our mikveh. And so that is why it just felt like also this opportunity. We also do workshops, groups come from around the world. Tour groups have already been coming for years to do workshops about mikveh, where I'll talk about mikveh, and then they'll all be invited to immerse. We have interfaith groups. We have groups of Christian ministers who come. It's just beautiful and wonderful. And the thought that we could put this mikveh, this ancient mikveh, next to our mikveh, and so that people could not only experience mikveh as this reclaimed and reframed modern spiritual practice, but also see the continuity that this same ritual, and if you look at the mikvehs, if you put them, I don't know if you can, side by side, but you saw the way that ours looks, and you saw the ancient one, they look so similar. And it's really stunning to see the two right there. And it's such a tangible way to be able to talk about mikveh, so that the learning and the experience is just expanded incredibly. And one thing that we'd also like to do, Steve didn't mention, is the possibility of turning this mikveh into a usable mikveh again, because Yeshu Dre, who's the person who's going to be doing the restoration, he said that to us. Actually, that was his idea. He said, I can turn this mikveh to be a usable mikveh again, where people can be immersing again in this ancient mikveh. And wow, to have people and groups come, and we could offer to them to either immerse in the modern mikveh where the water is filtered and heated, or they could go in the ancient one if they prefer, and have that kind of authentic experience. So that's the vision. And it's actually, we really kind of thought it was more of a dream, and now the fact that it's becoming a reality is very exciting. How am I with time? Perfect. Okay. So I'm happy to take questions, and Steve is too.
Yeah. So that's the story of our two mikvaot, the ancient one and the modern one. And at the moment, we're still in the throes of trying to make sure that we can get the mikveh here and set it up appropriately, and gather resources so that when it gets here, we can present it to the public in a fashion that's appropriate and respectful. So we actually, although this is not intended to be a fundraising pitch, but for those of you who find it sufficiently interesting, I'll put into the chat the juicer fundraising link if any of you want to go on to there and kind of make join the effort that we have in order to get the mikveh here and get it set up and get it refurbished. We're more than happy to be able to allow you to do so. So that's the story. And again, you can see here Anat Harel, who is directly involved in a lot of what we're doing, myself and Haviva, and here we are with the archaeologists on site at the site of the mikveh. And at the moment, as we speak, it's actually still there. We had thought maybe that the work might could be done already by this week, but we're hopeful perhaps by the end of the month to actually have the transfer made. I've been working closely with the Antiquities Authority and the Regional Council and the engineers to make this happen with the support of Haviva and Anat, and we're happy to have you join our efforts.
Thank you very much, Steve. Can you close the... Okay, fine. We are back to the big picture of all the participants. Any question? Any comment or question? Yes, Sandy. Sandy, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay,
yes.
I've unmuted. I raised my hand on the raise hand part of the thing, but I guess you didn't notice. Anyway, my question is for Haviva. I'd like to have more information, or if you could send me links to how to be in touch with you, if there are people that are interested, maybe groups. A few people, I mean, not, you know, an enormous group, but a few friends that might be interested in doing something of this sort. It sounds wonderful. I personally very much relate to the spiritual part of the immersion and the change that comes from that. So that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm happy to be in touch with you. How should I just type something into the...
Well, I have your email address, of course.
Okay, that's great.
So I can pass it on to
okay.
Sandy.
And that's exactly, just to say, you know, that's exactly what we do. There's such a range, but small groups, big groups, individuals. I've had many people who I prepare a personal ceremony for them to come and mark anything in their lives. I just this weekend had a woman who came for the entire Shabbat before she's getting married, and she had a lot of things to work out before she could immerse. And so we spent a couple of days doing various meetings and helping her create a ceremony. It was incredibly transformative experience for her. So it's very custom made, you know, it's the idea really is to serve the person who's coming to immerse, or the group, you know, and that's our idea, is that it's like, you know, holy work to really just be there for the people and not to impose our own rules or ideas on the experience. So
thank you. I'm waiting for your email to contact you.
Okay, Catherine, unmute yourself. Okay.
Yeah. I'm afraid I'll display my ignorance with this question, but I wonder, do you know if the practice of mikvah is actually the root of the Christian practice of baptism?
Me?
Or Steve.
Or either of you, I don't know.
Haviva, well, why don't you go first? I mean, I have my own opinions, but
yeah, so let's see, and somebody here might also know more. What I know is that there's this verses in the New Testament where Jesus immersed and then, you know, had this very spiritual experience, and it's kind of, you know, he saw the light. And so I think, you know, based on that, this idea of immersion to be a way to become, you know, to Christian. But I think there's all different ways too. Like mostly there's sprinkling, but there is a full body, also full body immersion. So there's a range, but yes, it is definitely the origin for sure. I mean, that I think I could say with certainty. And one thing amazing, if you come and see these immersions taking place on the Jordan River, these different sites where pilgrims come from used to come from around the world to do this full body immersion. It's very dramatic. So hopefully one day we'll all be able to come see
Yeah,
that.
just let me add briefly to that, Kathleen. Many of the rituals in the Christian tradition are stem from and come out of the roots of Judaism, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Jesus, I tell my tourists sometimes to their surprise, because they never thought of it that way, that Jesus born, lived, and died as a Jew, and John the Baptist was Jewish, and John was trying to get the Jews back to their roots of Judaism and what Judaism was really intended to be, and a lot of what Jesus's message is about that kind of stuff. And if you read the New Testament closely, certainly Acts and Corinthians and it's a very Jewish book, and there's a lot so that the idea of using water as purification is, I would guess it's not even only just a Jewish concept. Okay, I'm sure it has roots even beyond that, but certainly in this area, it certainly is the foundation of a lot of those practices, for sure.
May I add to it?
Mm.
I have made a study of it, and it's 100% sure that baptism in the early times, it was never sprinkling. It was always by immersion. So the origins of Christian baptism are in the Mikve.
Okay. Eli?
Yes. I listened to your lecture very carefully and enjoyed it very much, and I commend you. I think that it was a great idea to take this site that you have found and transfer it and move it from wherever it was underneath a road onto your kibbutz, where it can be enjoyed by many in the world. And really well done, kol hakavod. And I think even better than that is your idea of marketing, because if you sell it as Jesus actually bathed there, and not to mention King Herod, then you will get a lot of tourists coming, and all you need to do is be in touch with the right people that market these kind of things and get the buses going once the coronavirus is over and tourists resume coming to Israel. So kol hakavod.
David?
To follow up from Eli, I think the lesson has already been learned on Kibbutz Ginon Sar with the Jesus boat. I think both the Jesus boat and the mikveh are probably more of the time of the period rather than any provable actual involvement of Jesus himself. For those of you in Jerusalem who've never seen a full mikveh, ancient mikveh, on the slope between the road to the Kotel and down to the wall of the Kotel, the road, the old Roman road, and the old shops, there is an almost complete mikveh that you can see at any time if you go down into that area. Those of you who want to know more about it, I'll be quite happy to tell you. But I've been worried about mikvot for some time because I always worry about the water. Baptism in the running stream, I understand perfectly. There's the purification aspects of the water itself. In the mikveh, especially in Second Temple times and maybe around the temple itself, where you had thousands of pilgrims, the water in the mikveh, remember there was no plug hole to let the water out and replace it with fresh. It had to be emptied and things. I wonder if you'd tell us something about the differences between spiritual cleanliness and hygiene cleanliness.
Sure. First of all, to speak to your point about the hygiene, so there are strict codes from the health ministry of how a mikveh can be today. And so we actually have a filter like a swimming pool. We have a filter, we use chemicals, and so the water is quite clean. You saw in the photograph. It's, you know, it may take away a little bit from the spiritual experience because you walk in and there's a little bit of a smell of, you know, chlorine. But some people that really puts them at ease, you know, so it just depends on the person. But the way it works is that there's a cistern of rainwater that is always filled with just rainwater that's under the floor next to the immersion pool. And that is connected to the immersion pool. And so it's a rabbinic construct, really, in order to make it so that you can have your cake and eat it too. You know, you can immerse in a very clean, heated pool, but technically, according to the Jewish religious law, halacha, it's also considered a kosher mikveh because it's attached to this cistern of rainwater through, there's like a connection, it's called a kissing mikveh, you know, that the two are kissing each other, and so the water can kind of flow between them, but you can be assured that where you're immersing is not going to, I mean, even during Corona, we've been open because they say that chlorine kills the virus. So, so that's to answer like the technical question of how do we keep things. But in terms of the spiritual question, so like we have people come and they're supposed to shower before they go in the mikveh. And that's really to stress the idea that you're not coming for physical cleaning. You're coming for some kind of a spiritual cleansing. And for some people, the experience isn't even about spiritual cleansing. It can also be about connecting to some deeper part of yourself. There's so many different ways to understand mikveh, but if you are putting it in the context of cleansing, so yeah, refreshing, renewing, spiritual cleansing, starting new, starting over. But it's definitely, it's not about a physical cleansing. And actually the Rambam Maimonides says that. So it's not a physical cleansing. It might have been that originally, you know, when people didn't bathe as much as they do today, that the two were much more intertwined, you know, and so a physical cleansing could also give you the feeling of also having a spiritual cleansing. But today, when people do bathe so often, it's very clear that it's not for that.
I was just thinking of Second Temple times, of the mikveh being filled, and where the mikveh I described in Jerusalem over here would be quite difficult to clean out and to replace. Yeah. I would not like to have been pilgrim number 1027.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Art had a question.
Steve, I'd like, and Haviva, I'd like to go back to your opening about the site itself. What do you know about the extent of the site? A town or just a private mikveh of a rich estate owner? And can the site, can the archaeological work continue? I could see in the picture that the road is going to go right over the mikveh. But what can be salvaged on site, if anything is worth salvaging on site? You know.
Okay, so let me.
Where there's a mikveh, there's probably more.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point. So let me deal with that. The excavations that were being carried out were actually started 2 and 3 years ago. This latest excavation was done because of a slight change in the path of the road, and so there was an area that they said this part needed to be done more thoroughly. In the initial excavations, they found remnants from both the Byzantine period. When we say Byzantine period, we mean from say 363 onward, 369 onward, and that till the Muslim conquest, about 638. So in those 300 years, more or less, and from the Roman period. And in the things that they found indicated that there was not a settlement there, but rather a farm that might have been a farm and some sort of a guard post, either to guard the farm itself or perhaps to guard the road that would have gone nearby, the road towards Sipori, coming from Akko to Sipori on the way to Tiberias, or coming up from the valleys from Megiddo and Yokneam. So, but there was not indication of a village per se, which made the discovery of a mikveh needed some explanation, because generally a mikveh is a place where, where people are living. They have need for a mikveh, although there have been discoveries, most notably, I'd say, nearby here in Usha, where there are mikvahs that are affiliated or surrounding a wine press or an olive press. And so immediately upon finding the mikvah, we only had a short period of time to do the excavation. We found the mikvah was identified, I'd say, on a Wednesday morning, like late Tuesday, Wednesday morning, and we had to end on Thursday. So Thursday, what they did is we hurriedly tried to see if we could find an olive press or a wine press in the nearby vicinity, which we were unable to do, but we were only restricted to a very limited area. So there is no rethinking as to whether or not this was actually a village as opposed to an agricultural farm. On the other hand, there is much more on the site that can be excavated, and where the road is, most of the area that the road is going to cover up has been looked at now, so that, but there are places on both to the left and the
You went dead.
Your sound is gone.
No, picture also.
right have now been identified as sites for some future. So that's the answer. That's the short answer.
Okay. Geert, you had a question?
Yeah, well, I wanted to come back to the issue of tourism. I am the third one in our midst who is a tour guide. It's a great idea, but try to sell it to tour operators abroad. For it's my experience that when you get a group from abroad, the tour operator abroad makes the program and he just only takes the places that he knows of that the tourists want to go. So I have had many problems in Holland, for instance, to get people to convince them that it was worthwhile, for instance, to visit Magdala. You know, that will also be a problem in this case to convince them, for if they are not convinced, you can never get a tourist, at least not of groups. So, you know, it's a great idea, but the marketing abroad may be the main problem. The same applies to the Jesus boat. Why it's called Jesus boat, I never understood. It should have been Peter's boat anyway. But the tourist operators abroad have no idea what they are talking about. No.
Okay. Marty, you had a question.
Yeah, just a comment and a very interesting topic, Steve and Rabbi Haviva. I wouldn't underestimate the value of the agro-tourism here, because taking it back to the beginning of your meeting, when you honored the invention of the daguerreotype or the photograph, I think beyond the industrial application, the fact that it ushered in an era of increased communication among people, and the beginning of what we see today on the internet and the beautiful virtual backgrounds that I'm seeing on my screen. The power of the photograph, very important in bringing people's knowledge to a point where it's powerful, it's profound. Especially now, when you think about the photographs you may have seen of around the end of World War II and the Holocaust ending and the atom bomb. striking photographs that'll never leave your memory. Today, especially in the time of pandemic, it takes me back to a moment 6 years ago on a tourism trip in Barcelona of the Jewish Quarter. And there I happened to walk in with my wife to a clothing store. And in the back of the clothing store was a running stream surrounded with bricks that the tour guide attributed to being an ancient mikveh. And apparently the site was one of 5 synagogues in the city of Barcelona at the time of the 1300s. And this surrounds the cathedral downtown area where they held the court of the Inquisitor. It also was a time where I lost some youthful innocence at the age of 64. Maybe a little late in life to lose that, but I left there disgusted because at a time when Spain was being ravaged 670 years ago by the Black Plague, the people who seemed to be spared were the Jews who immersed themselves in the mikveh and practiced cleanliness. The practice of cleanliness among the general population followed the rituals of the ancient Romans, which was application of perfumes and powders, not very effective against the virus as we find today with the coronavirus. The difference then being that Peter the Cruel, who was protecting the Jews through high taxes to support his expansion of the Kingdom of Aragon, couldn't stop the pogrom that destroyed the Jewish quarter and killed between 25 and 50,000 Jews, simply because they felt, this tour guide was convinced because they felt that the Jews were the cause of the plague since they were spared. Today, I think taking it forward from the photograph and the fact that we can communicate internationally so readily, not going to happen. I don't think the politicians can point to the Jews or any other group as the cause of the coronavirus. So I'm very pleased that you recognize the importance of technology in our fight against what might be a God-created virus. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Any other question or comment?
Yeah, could I just say something quickly?
Yes, David.
This relates to something that Art had said. Salvage digs. You know, in Israel, virtually wherever you put a spade down, you will find something. Especially here in the area of Jerusalem, this is so. So you actually find that many of the salvage digs that go on occasionally, but very rarely, will result in a change of the planners of a road or whatever it is, if it is very important. Problem with mikvaot and lots of other things is that there are thousands of them in the country, and unless they're special, really special, they will either be destroyed in the construction of the road or they will be covered again and noted for future generations to know that there was a mikveh there. But the salvage diggers of the Israel Antiquities Authority is probably the major part of their work, just recording what is there. It's all very well saying, you can't, you've got to preserve, you've got to preserve, you've got to preserve. We have a growing population and there are all kinds of needs. So the salvage dig is something that we should be aware of and sympathize. When we were having lunch at Bet Yelin, there was a big excavation going on just across the road. Part of it will be near Motza. There is the saving of the major part of the area, but part of it is also a salvage dig, which will be covered to deal with the whole question of the roads and the railway and everything else going into Jerusalem. So I think it's as well that everybody is aware of the difference between a salvage dig, which in fact destroys, and a salvage dig, which preserves and just leaves us with the knowledge that something is there.
Yeah.
If I can just add a comment to what David just said, the fact that we were able to salvage this particular mikveh, and the mikveh itself, you know, there are lots of mikvaot in the country, both certainly in the Jerusalem area, but not only, also in the Galilee, not necessarily from the Second Temple period, but certainly mikvaot are not, it's not a rare thing. And in fact, when I spoke to a couple of my archaeology friends, they said, you know, they weren't very excited at all. Well, you found a mikveh, so, you know, it's a mikveh. What's the big deal? You're like, why are you so, you know, excited or working so hard to save this particular mikveh? And the answer is really because of what's going on at Hanaton. The serendipity, or as Haviva would say, the synchronicity of the mikveh there and our mikveh, and the ability to kind of make the connection from through the generations of a practice that links us today to our past, was something that we felt was important, and we were able to raise some funds, but it was only really through some very lucky connections and some protection that we got some funds freed from the government. And so this is actually quite unusual that you'd actually take something from a salvage dig and actually spend a lot of money to move it. So David's absolutely right.
That's right.
Thank you very much. So
before you leave, here said something interesting as well, and that was the fact that many of the people, the tourists and things, know very little. Some of the things as tour guides, and I was that for a short period, we find is that the level of ignorance is quite incredible. I'm thinking of a Christian group that I took around, and on the Mount of Beatitudes, I found that none of them were really familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, which was a bit of a shock to me. I think that this applies not only there, but also to the Jewish tradition as well. People are not very familiar. So if you have something that really grabs them, like the Hanaton story of the mikveh and so on, I think it's a very, very good tourist draw. I think it's something that should be encouraged.
Well, may I add, if you want to attract Jewish tourists, don't talk about Jesus, but tell that Yehuda Hanassi lived close by, closer by.
Yes, but the Yehuda Hanassi tourists are rare and not exactly spend too much money, you know. So better Jesus and Herod, you know.
guys, with this, if we discuss this issue further, we come into politics, you know. So I'd like to thank both of our speakers. I'd like to thank all of you for being present. Many thanks for our two visitors, Kathleen and Marty. Marty couldn't see the presentation, so we will email it to you. Robert made the recording, and I will send to Robert your email address. Okay, so thank you very much, and I close today's meeting.
Very fine.